All right, welcome back to the third part of Lesson three's video instruction, and hopefully we won't take a fourth part, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. Slide 48 is where we're at, and the opening stages of Case Blue, or Fall Blau, Operation Blue, were fairly successful. Early in July, the Germans punched through the Russian lines and captured the city of Voronezh. The German 6th Army advanced eastward and linked up with the German forces coming down from the Don River, and as the 6th Army moved along, they turned right and began moving down the Don towards its easternmost point, where it bends 40 miles from Stalingrad. So if you take a look at a map, you'll see this. While General Paulus, commander of the German 6th Army, pressed ahead, Army Group A drove past the city of Rostov at the mouth of the Don River, scattering Soviet resistance. The moment was prime to trap the Russians between Army Group A and the 6th Army, but Hitler diverted Army Group A south, away from linking up with General Paulus, and instead towards the Caucasus where the oil was. And as a result of this decision, thousands of Red Army troops escaped the trap. Next slide. By August the 1st, 1942, the 6th Army, supported by General Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, was only 40 miles from Stalingrad, and as they pressed towards the city, Army Group A ran out of gas on its way to the Caucasus. Of course, Hitler was furious with this, and he fired Field Marshal List and assumed command of Army Group A himself. On August the 8th, the Maykop oil fields in the Caucasus were captured. August 23rd, the 6th Army reached the banks of the Volga River just north of Stalingrad and began upon trial by fire that left more blood and destruction than any other battle in history. By September, the German advance of Army Group B had pushed the Russians as far as they would or could go, and with their backs to the Volga River, the Russians prepared to stand and fight in the city of Stalingrad. Within the industrial city of Stalingrad, workers were hard at work building defenses, and Hitler was bound and determined that he was going to take Stalingrad. And in keeping with his ideological aims, he ordered his commanders to wipe out Stalingrad's male population and deport the females to slave labor camps in Germany. Next slide. On September the 3rd, 1942, the Luftwaffe launched a 24-hour bombing assault under the command of Wolfram von Richthofen, who was a cousin to Baron, the Red Baron of World War I, Baron von Richthofen, Manfred von Richthofen. And this bombing campaign virtually left the city in ruins. Next slide. Buildings became piles of rubble, and there were fires erupting all over the city. Next slide. As with Operation Barbarossa, Case Blue represented an enormous overreach by the Germans in logistics as well as strategic terms, and only a very few foresaw the worst obstacle facing the 6th Army. The Luftwaffe, its massive bombing raids, had not only failed to destroy the enemy's will, but their very bombs turned the city into a perfect killing ground for the Russians to use against them. Next slide. General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the Russian 62nd Army, had already noticed the reluctance of German troops to engage the Russians in close-quarter combat, city fighting, if you will, especially in the hours of darkness. And so to wear them down, Chuikov said, quote, "Every German must be able to feel that he is living under the muzzle of a Russian gun." End quote. The real obstacle to the attacking Germans, as they soon discovered, was within the ruined city landscape itself. You have to remember that the Wehrmacht had best utilized wide open expanses like Poland and the Russian steppe to execute their Bewegungskrieg tactics. So house-to-house fighting was not something to which they were accustomed. In fact, next slide, German infantrymen, they actually loathed house-to-house fighting, and they found such close-quarter combat, which broke conventional military boundaries and dimensions, psychologically disorienting. And Chuikov took advantage of this and deliberately pushed his troops into extreme close-quarter battle conditions, ordering them to hug the German troops, which would limit the use of the Luftwaffe and German artillery because they would kill their own men. So it was not uncommon during the 5-month city fighting to have a Russian platoon occupying, one floor of a building, while a couple floors down there would be a German unit stationed there. And this close quarter combat in these ruined buildings and rubble, cellars and sewers, was soon dubbed by the Germans Krieg, or War of the Rats. Next slide. Chuikov soon recognized that the key infantry weapons in Stalingrad would be the submachine gun, the grenade, and the sniper's rifle. Next slide. In fact, a couple of Soviet soldiers really stood out, became world-famous snipers during the Battle of Stalingrad. One was a man by the name of Vasily Zaitsev. Zaitsev was from the Ural Mountain area and was taught to shoot by his grandpa. And during Fall Blau, Zaitsev killed 257 Nazis with his bolt-action Mosin Nagant rifle. Zaitsev was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union medal for his efforts. Next slide. Another Hero of the Soviet Union medal recipient was a female named Ludmila Pavlichenko. Ludmila Pavlichenko. Pavlichenko was from Kiev and had graduated with a master's degree in history in 1937. When Barbarossa began, she was requested to join the Red Army. She was offered a position as a nurse, but Pavlichenko refused and instead wanted to become a soldier. Her shooting skills quickly brought attention of the sniper instructors, and she became one of 2,000 female Soviet snipers who fought during the Second World War. She killed a remarkable 309 Germans, more than any other female sniper in history, and earned her the nickname Lady Death. Next slide. On November the 19th, 1942, the Russians launched Operation Uranus, in which over 3,500 Soviet artillery pieces opened up on the weakly held Romanian flanking position north of Stalingrad along the Don River. By noon of that day, the Russians had broken through Romanian defenses. The following morning, the Soviet 51st Army annihilated the entire Romanian 6th Corps on the south side of the city. And on November the 21st, the two arms of the Russian pincher linked up 45 miles west of Stalingrad at a place called Kalak, cutting off the supplies and trapping the entire German 6th Army. Next slide. By late January of 1943, German soldiers began to write their farewell letters home, and on January the 31st, an emaciated Field Marshal Paulus, the commander of the German 6th Army, on the left of this slide there on the picture, he walked out of the battered Univermag department store, which he had been using as his headquarters. He disobeyed the Fuhrer and he surrendered formally. Next slide. Got tongue-tied there. By February the 2nd of 43, all resistance ended, and out of 250,000 German soldiers, 91,000 marched off to captivity. Only 5,000 of those would ever make it back to Germany again. By failing to overcome the Red Army in 1941, Hitler was bounced into a protracted attritional war for which Germany was neither mentally nor physically prepared. By the time German troops launched Fall Blau on June 28th of 1942 and had attacked Stalingrad in August, the lightning maneuver, the Bewegungskrieg of the Wehrmacht, was pretty much over. One more victory stood in their future when Field Marshal von Manstein defeated the Soviets at the Third Battle of Kharkov in March of 43, but this only delayed the inevitable, and it led to the Wehrmacht's decisive defeat during Operation Citadel, or the Battle of Kursk, in July of 1943. After the summer of 43, the Soviets chased a retreating Wehrmacht all the way back to Berlin. This next slide here is a tabulation of German and Soviet losses that occurred during the Russo-German War, and notice that 4 out of every 5 German soldiers killed during the Second World War died on the Eastern Front. Estimates conclude that around 30 million Soviets died during the war. And this data, of course, did not become available until after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Next slide. If you're interested, this is a list of some of the books on Operation Barbarossa and the Russo-German War. Most of these I've read. Albert Seton's The Russo-German War is in my library at home, was written in the 1970s before new primary source data was released by the Soviet archives. Enduring the Whirlwind by Gregory Ledecky reveals that the common idea that the Germans lost against the Russians because of numerical superiority is false. This is a great book that blows that myth out of the water. David Glantz's When Titans Clashed, probably one of the best researched works on the subject, and it makes good use of Russian primary sources. Colonel Glantz was in the United States Army, and he has written numerous books on the Eastern Front. He's considered the quintessential expert on the Eastern Front today. Craig Luther, I met Craig at the Base Exchange on Base, actually, when he was trying to sell his 2 books that he's written. His books are incredibly detailed. I've got one of them. I'm looking at it right now in the library. I'll bring it in for when I teach this lesson in class. You can look at it. But relies on excellent sources. War Without Garlands by Robert Kershaw gives a good first-hand account from the German soldier's point of view. Cataclysm tells the story from more of the Soviet perspective. And then, of course, Tearing the Guts Out of the Wehrmacht is my master's thesis that I wrote, and I've attached in Canvas. It's about 100 pages. And my thesis is that the Germans lost to the Russians due to the Soviets having better armor, better tactics, and a better fighting ethos. And so these are just a few of the books that I would recommend and studies that I would recommend that you do on the Eastern Front. Now, a couple things I wanted to show you. This is a primary source. This would be a Russian garrison cap that the average Soviet soldier, Red Army soldier, would have worn. That's part of their uniform. But in the fighting in Operation Barbarossa in the wintertime, the Soviets would have worn this particular headgear item. So these flaps come down to cover the ears. This is called a Ushanka, is what this is known as. And then another item that would have been worn during the Battle of Stalingrad as well as Operation Barbarossa by the Soviets would have been this garment, and this was called a Telogreika, and you'll see that it's a quilted garment, very thick padding, designed to keep them warm. Of course, they came to the battle, the fight with the Germans. They came well prepared. Germans did not, and so that is going to wrap it up for this third part to Lesson 3 on the Eastern Front. And I will see you next week when we talk about, I believe, the rise of Japan and their attack on Pearl Harbor.